Sometimes I have a hard time coming up with a word that explains Carl. Evil just doesn't seem strong enough, diabolical. You know, he is just a monster, a monster. And I was married to him. I was married to him for 18 years.
I think part of you knew deep down that this day was going to come.
No, because I didn't have anything to do with it. I really did not.
I would have thoughts thinking, who is this man and what lurks behind those eyes?
We can prove it. You confessed to your wife.
I lied to my wife.
I was very adamant and driven to get enough evidence or whatever I could do to get somebody to believe me. But I had to be careful. Every night I would wonder, is this the night that I'm gonna die? Growing up, I always knew that my aspirations in life was just to be a mom. But the doctors had told me that I probably wouldn't be able to conceive naturally. I had, some fertility issues. The night I met Carl, my aunt and I had decided that we were gonna go line dancing.
This is a cool place.
Yeah, it's really cute.
Yeah, so are the guys.
Stop.
And my aunt pointed out a man that was standing at the bar. She was encouraging me and elbowing me and saying, he's handsome. This might be the guy for you.
Hi, ladies.
Hi.
How are you guys doing tonight?
Oh, we're having fun.
And he asked very politely, I'd like to buy you a drink. And we just started talking from there. What intrigued me a lot about him was the fact that he was a single dad with 3 children. He had 2 girls and a boy. So I looked at it as, this might be my opportunity to have my dream come true. That night is when he told the story about his first wife dying in a fire in California 1 year ago.
I was doing some repairs, and I just heard screaming from the house.
Oh my God.
Carl had said that he had been out in the garage working, and he had heard her screaming, "Carl, get the children." And he looked and realized that the house was on fire. He said he was able to get the children out, but he was not able to get near the bathroom where Christina had died. I asked him why couldn't she get out of the bathroom, and Carl had said that the only window in the bathroom had been boarded up because a couple months before that, the window had broken. He tried to save her, but she was unable to escape. He was very distraught over it.
I'm so sorry, Carl. I didn't mean to bring this up. Is this your wife? Can I see?
This picture is Christina. One of the first reactions I got from Carl's parents when I first met them is, oh my gosh, you look just like Christina. From what I understand, she was this great person and had a good heart and only wanted what was best for her children. I truly felt sorry for him. This poor man is struggling, trying to be a single dad. The children were 6, 7, and 8. 2 girls and a boy, Levi being the middle child, Katie and Levi and Aaron. 3 children that needed a mom, and I wanted to be a mom.
Carl,
And 9 months after we met, we got married. On mine and Carl's wedding day, we didn't want to make a big affair of everything. Him and I and the 3 kids went in front of the justice of the peace. This was the beginning of my fairy tale that I thought was going to come true. And I was very happy at this point. Shortly after we were married, I would occasionally catch Carl in telling lies.
Carl?
And I started noticing he would lie about money.
Hey, we got this in the mail today.
Yeah? What does it say?
It says we owe money.
A year after we were married, I had gotten a note from the bank that said this $2,000 loan had come due. And I asked Carl about it. I said, "What is this? Why do we owe $2,000 to the bank?" And he had said it was a loan that he had taken out before he met me.
You know, this is an old one.
Can't be old. The date's current.
That did not make sense to me.
Cindy, don't worry about it, all right? I'll take care of it.
All right.
So I went down to the bank and I asked him to please tell me the date of when this loan was first taken out. And it had been exactly a year. So I knew he lied to me. And I confronted him.
Found out about the loan. I looked into it and I saw the paperwork.
So what?
And this was not something that you took out before you met me, and you lied to me, and I want you to explain that.
You're saying I'm lying?
If that's what the paperwork says.
And the paperwork is wrong.
When Carl was caught in a lie, he would defend himself vehemently, but I would not let him win on that. And I just kept telling him, "I know you're lying."
Carl, it has your signature on it. Why can't you be honest with me?
No, don't give me this, okay? What do you want me to do?
And then he would finally admit, "All right, okay, I did this, but I didn't think you'd approve of it."
Don't you understand that?
And he would say, "I'm very sorry. I want you to trust me again,
I'm sorry, okay?
and I won't do it again." And he wouldn't until the next time. There was always a next time. We had horses, and I did horseback riding, which I loved. It was a passion of mine.
Cindy, look.
What?
Look at this.
And he came upon this horse named Ginger. Carl was very excited about her.
Look at her.
She's beautiful.
She is.
He felt that he could use her for breeding purposes to produce prize-winning Belgian horses. So Carl thought that Ginger was going to bring in a lot of money.
Do you really think we should spend the money on this?
Cindy, if we spend the money on this, it's gonna make us a whole bunch later on.
Carl, if you say so.
I love this picture. That's Ginger. And we had other horses, but Ginger just was special. Carl just told me that he was going to add her to the farm insurance policy, and just in case things don't work out, try to get back the money that we have into her. I said, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. But after many attempts of trying to breed her, he discovered she couldn't get pregnant. One night, I remember Carl waking up and going downstairs. And a few minutes later, he came back to bed, and I asked him, where did you go? What were you doing? And he said, oh, I went to the bathroom. Well, that didn't make sense to me because we had an upstairs bathroom. But a lot of times he would raid the refrigerator and lie about it. So I just assumed that he went down to the refrigerator and was just grabbing some food.
Cindy! Cindy!
A few minutes later, I remember Carl sitting upright and him saying to me,
What? Oh my God, Carl! What's happening?
oh my gosh, the barn's on fire.
Cindy! Cindy! The barn's on fire! The barn's on fire!
Oh my God, Carl!
I remember Carl sitting upright out of bed, screaming, call 911, the barn's on fire.
Can you send someone quicker? Our barn is on fire!
It was an old barn. It had a lot of old hay, so it kind of engulfed quickly. And it didn't take long to realize that any horse that might have been in there would not survive the fire. The next day, fire investigators came out.
Okay, the building, structurally, still sound. You've got a lot of repairs you've got to do. And it seems to me, this is your source.
They suspected that because there was this old radio, maybe the faulty wiring sparked the hay, and that's what caused it. So it was ruled, accidental.
I'm very sorry to tell you that the animals just did not make it.
I really didn't suspect anything, but I did have a question for Carl is, how did you know that the barn was on fire? Because you couldn't see the barn from our window. You had to kind of look backwards at it.
Carl,
Yeah.
how did you know there was a fire?
I woke up and I heard it, Cindy.
And his answer to me was that he could hear the crackling, and that's what alerted him. And I remember thinking, well, I didn't hear it. I would say within a month, we probably got the insurance check. My recollection is that it was for $115,000, although Carl disputes that. The first time that I ever was scared physically, we had an argument.
It's just annoying. Every time I check the account, it's overdrawn, Carl.
Well, what do you want me to say, Cindy? It costs a lot of money to run a farm.
When checks would come in for the business, he would take them and cash them and spend them. And it was a fight, a constant fight that we had kept having.
Carl, I'm sick of having this argument.
And I went to reach for the door handle to leave. And he blocked the door and said, "You're not leaving."
You sick of it? I'm sick of it too.
He kind of wrapped me in a bear hug and wouldn't let me move. And the look in his eyes, it scared me. I think he enjoyed it, that he had the upper hand and he had control. I knew that I was not going to be able to get free from him. I had to diffuse the situation. I just had to keep talking to him.
Carl, you're scaring me. Stop.
And he did. Eventually, he released me. When I was free, that I said to him, "I just want you to know that if you ever do that to me again, you and I are done."
Okay, Cindy, I'm sorry. It wasn't... Okay. All right.
But I didn't really think at that time that I was going to leave him. Here I was, a new mom to these children, and they had already lost a mom, and I didn't feel like I could do that to them. I mean, he never laid a hand on me again after that. So I forgave him. We were going through in vitro fertilization treatments to try to have a child of my own. And after Alex was born, Carl really took an active role in being a father. That's Alex on Carl's shoulders. Obviously, he's pretty happy and not worried about anything. You can tell on Alex's face that he loves his dad. And this period in our lives was one of the happiest. Yes, Carl and I had had issues in the past, but everything was going to be okay after this, and I truly believe that. The brunt of his anger was taken out on the sons. After Alex was old enough to start doing chores is when he got angered the most.
Alex, turn it off! Cut it off!
One time I looked out the window and saw Alex on the lawnmower, and I could tell Carl was yelling at him and berating him, and Alex was just sitting there with his head down. And I thought, what is going on?
What did I tell you?
Go easy around the...
What did I tell you?
Carl's very angry. And I walked out and I said, what's going on?
I wasn't acting stupid.
Don't you ever talk back to me!
And Carl's demeanor completely changed and said, oh, nothing, we're fine.
It's all right, honey. We're, he's doing good.
But I knew that wasn't the truth. Just the look on his face, you could see the anger in his eyes, and his fists were clenched. That's when I started thinking, who is this man and what lurks behind those eyes?
Seneca County 911 Center.
And we just got home, and I don't think he's alive.
You don't think he's alive?
No.
Okay.
I was in disbelief that this was happening to me.
Oh my God.
What do I do? Now, this is the one that's scary. This is the one that shows who Carl Carlson is. Look how deranged he looks, how crazy he looks. Look at his eyes. You can see it in his eyes. Empty eyes, evil eyes. This is the real Carl Carlson. This is who he is. Him and Carl would just butt heads at times. You know, Levi was defiant a lot of times, purposefully.
You live in my house, you follow my rules.
I'm not listening to you anymore, okay? You think you're so smart? I know your little secret.
Oh, yeah, tough guy. What's that?
When he was 17, I remember a time when Levi had accused Carl of killing his mother.
You killed him! I know you started the fire!
Actually accused him of setting the fire.
Don't you talk to me like that!
Carl absolutely lost his temper and did not hold back.
You're not talking about that way!
Aaron and I, it took all that we could do to get Carl pulled off of Levi. And Levi got free of him and went out and got in his pickup truck and was trying to get away from Carl. And I remember yelling to Carl, just let him go. Just let him go. And I viewed it as just Levi going through this rebellious period. Levi started turning the corner and realizing that I have to be this mature adult. Carl had a good job at a glass company, and Levi asked Carl if he could maybe try to get him a job there. So Carl got him hired there, and him and Carl really seemed like they were getting along finally. We had to leave for my aunt's funeral around noon, and Carl had come in and said that Levi was going to be coming out to the farm that day because he had some work to do on his pickup truck and going to use our tools and use the garage.
You know, Levi said he'd be here a couple hours at least.
And, you know, got to be noon, time for us to leave. And Carl, sort of like as an afterthought, said, wait for me in the car. I'm going to run out and tell Levi that we're leaving and make sure he has everything that he needs. And I said, okay. I would say that I was waiting in the car no more than 3 minutes. Carl came and got in the driver's seat, and we drove away. I noticed that Levi's pickup truck was still in the same spot as when we left.
I'll go tell Levi that we're back, okay? Okay. All right.
And it wasn't, 30 seconds, 45 seconds that Carl came up and started banging on the window and telling me to call 911.
Levi's been in an accident. The truck fell on him. Call 911.
911, what's location of your emergency?
I think I need an ambulance.
Okay, what's going on?
The truck fell on my stepson.
The truck fell on your stepson?
And we just got home, and I don't think he's alive.
Okay, are you with your son right now?
He's not alive.
Is he breathing?
No.
He is not breathing. Okay.
No.
Okay, we're going to start CPR, okay?
Yeah, Carl, they want to start CPR. Do you know CPR? No. His chest is crushed.
His chest is crushed?
No. He's probably been under here for hours. Oh my God.
One of the worst days of my life. Horrible. Just horrible. Carl seemed very distraught, throwing himself up against the wall. For a fleeting moment, I was thinking to myself, it seemed overly distraught. It just didn't seem true to me. But then I was mad at myself and said, this is his biological son. How would you act, if you just found your son dead? I was 100% certain that he had murdered Levi. And I was afraid that if Carl found out that I even had any suspicions about anything, that he would kill me. It was probably a week after the funeral that Carl told me that Levi had actually had a life insurance policy. And, I said, he did?
For Levi?
Yeah, apparently he had it all set up.
Really?
And then he said, well, I didn't know this, but he made me beneficiary to the accounts because Levi and his ex-wife, they kind of went through a nasty divorce. He didn't want to make his ex-wife beneficiary, so your next person in line would be a parent. And that made sense to me.
Seems prudent.
What he first told me was the insurance was for $300,000. But then he said, well, I found out that there was actually an accidental rider on it, so it's actually worth $700,000. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot of money.
It's worth quite a lot. You should probably get some advice about how to invest it in something.
I guess so.
So, I'll look into it.
I would start having these thoughts that maybe Carl had something to do with this. It just seemed like too many coincidences happened with Carl for his own benefit. His first wife, the barn fire, then all of this with Levi and, the insurance. But I would say, Cindy, what are you thinking? This is your husband. Nobody does this. But then the thoughts would start coming more and more. And as time went on, I kept having these panic attacks. And they were coming closer and closer together. And I honestly thought maybe I was going crazy. Am I just paranoid? Whose husband would carry out these horrible things that I'm thinking? Nobody does. You don't kill your own children. I had gone away with a friend, and it was probably at like 4 in the morning. And I realized I've left my son home with him. Is my son safe? And I had the grand mal of panic attacks. The worst one that I've ever had. Nobody's gonna be there to protect him. And that was my worst, horrifying feeling. That I can't protect my children. A mother's job is to protect their children, and when you gotta protect them from their own father, it's a horrifying feeling. I got no sleep that night. And so I Googled private investigators near me. And one of the first ones that come up, I met with him and asked him if he could look into it.
Did you find anything?
Well, I got some interesting news.
My number one concern at this point was, is there a policy out on Alex? That was one of the first things that I had asked.
First, it appears that your son is in the clear. I wasn't able to identify any policies on him.
Thank God.
He told me at that time that no, there was no policy on Alex. So I felt a little bit better.
But
then he said to me, my granddaughters each had $300,000 on them.
No.
And that I was worth $1.2 million dead to Carl. So my life was probably at risk. It's hard to explain the feeling I was actually feeling when I found out that I was worth so much to him dead. Panic and just frenzy.
Listen, I really think you should be careful.
Now what do I do? I had considered going to law enforcement and saying, I think this, I think this, I think this. But you have to realize that in Seneca County, the Carlsons are well known. And I was afraid that if I went to law enforcement with any suspicions and they didn't believe me, that somebody would tip Carl off to what I was doing. And so I decided to carry on as we normally would. Carl, through our whole marriage, sex was very important to him. And even when I knew that he was a murderer, I still had to give in to his desires, because if I didn't, it was going to raise red flags. I have to act like nothing is out of the ordinary. That was not an easy time in my life. I was basically sleeping with one foot touching his every night, sleeping with one eye open, not getting any sleep at all, constantly terrified. Is this the night that my life ends? I wanted to have enough evidence that somebody would pay attention. I was watching a TV show. It was a crime show about this woman that was recording her conversations with her mother to try to get her mother to confess to killing her father. And it just like this light bulb went on, and I said, I'm gonna start recording my conversations with Carl. I decided to move out. I fed him the story that we need a trial separation. We'd been fighting about money, and let's just separate for a while. And then, I started texting Carl and saying to him that I'm considering getting back together with him, but that I can't get back together with you unless you're going to be truthful about everything that happened in our marriage. So if you're interested, let's set up a meeting time and we'll meet. And he jumped right on it. And here I am with this voice recorder, and I'm gonna go and try to get him to confess to murder.
Part of me feels like I'm walking into a booby trap.
Oh my God, he's gonna try to kill me. Here I am with this voice recorder, and I'm gonna go and try to get him to confess to murder.
Hey.
Hey.
I was very nervous, and I was afraid that he would catch on. So my goal in the beginning of recording Carl was if I could just get him to maybe confess to setting the barn fire, it would at least show his character.
Thanks for meeting with me. I know we haven't really worked everything out.
I guess I just don't know what you want to discuss.
Of course, he completely denied it. I was trying to keep my cool, and I said to him, I can't get back together with you unless you're going to be truthful. He said, it sounds like you want me to say I had something to do with Levi's death. And it was at that moment that I thought, okay, we're not going to go to the barn fire. We're going right to Levi's death. So I just said to him, I would think that if you did do it, you probably did it for me because of all the turmoil that Levi put us through as a teenager. And once I suggested that, he said, yes, I did it for you.
I just wanted to stop all the anguish. I thought it might help us.
I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have it on tape. I said, tell me how it went that day. Was the truck hard to push? And he said, no, it wasn't hard. And he gave me an example of like a wheelbarrow, how a wobbly wheelbarrow would be.
I barely even touched the truck, and it just fell.
It was so surreal to me that I was getting him to talk about this, but also just hearing it come out of his mouth horrified me. Thinking what Levi must have gone through during those moments. I couldn't wait to finish the conversation and just run it to the sheriff's office. I gave him an excuse that I needed to drive over to my doctor's office to pick up a prescription. Made sure he wasn't following me. Then I drove around and went back to the sheriff's office. They did not hear the confession. It was too noisy, too much background noise. They could hear my questions and my answers to him, but they could not hear what he was saying. And I was horrified. The sheriff's office asked me if I would meet with Carl again, only this time wearing their wire. And of course I said yes. I set up a meeting with Carl again, encouraged him that I'm happy that things are moving the way that they're moving, but we still had more talking to do. And can we meet again for lunch? And so when I arrived, Carl was waiting for me.
How you got here early? Hope this is all right.
He seemed suspicious.
Part of me feels like I'm walking into a booby trap.
I'm scared half to death. But I'm trying not to be. I'm trying to keep it cool and collected.
How am I going to set a trap? Do you want to go through my purse?
I started right in with, okay, things still aren't making sense to me about what happened.
Things just still aren't making sense. Can you just tell me how things went that day?
Unfortunately, he changed his story. He didn't tell me the same thing that he had told me 2 days before. And, I argued with him.
That's not what you told me,
Yes,
Carl.
it is.
No, it isn't.
What did I say?
I asked you if you pushed the truck, and you said yes.
I didn't push the truck. I said I did nothing to do it.
So it's at this point, when I'm recording him, I'm realizing that he's changed his story. And he's going to try to convince me that what I had heard 2 days before wasn't real.
I just feel like you're not telling me the truth, and I get so irritated because I want this to work. Tell me how it all happened that day.
I went in there, I jacked it up, and just sort of like, all of a sudden, it was like being in a hurricane, being in a eerie calm. And then one thing just led to another.
You saw the opportunity.
So Carl is actually admitting that now at this point that he accidentally knocked the truck over on him and walked away.
Okay, Carl, and I believe that.
I was hopeful that maybe that was something that they could use. I wasn't sure, but I was hopeful.
Okay, well, I gotta head out. I'll be in touch with you. Okay? All right, bye.
What we know to be true is you pushed that car over.
I did not.
Well, you confessed to your wife.
I lied to my wife.
I've never seen that clip. I can tell that Carl's still trying to maintain control of the situation. I think Carl at this point is a little bit desperate and not sure how it's going to go for him.
You have to be honest with us and
I
tell us
am.
you didn't do it for the money.
I did not do it for the money, and I did not do it.
When I got the call, just relief beyond belief. This huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Alex was safe, I'm safe, and everything was going to be okay. But because he made a plea deal, his plea was 15 years to life. Technically, In 2027, he's eligible for parole. For 2 years, I went through this chronic pelvic pain. It started out subtle in the beginning, but just kept getting worse and more painful. You know, I went to the doctor and they did testing and kind of unexplained, not sure why. It was when it went away that I started thinking, why did it go away when I left Carl? I was talking to the PI and he said to me, Cindy, do you know that one of the signs and symptoms of arsenic poisoning is pelvic pain? It's something that I'll probably always wonder about if he was actually poisoning me. I couldn't help but think, how did his derangement not show through before? He doesn't look deranged in this picture at all. He doesn't look like a scary monster or anything like that, like you would see on TV. This is the Carl Carlson that everybody knew. And I loved. At one point, I loved him.
Miami never really sleeps. Even at 3 a.m., the air moves like breath over glass, humid, restless, full of noise, pretending to be silence. That night in 2003, it was the hum of sodium lights over Coral Grove Boulevard, the hiss of sprinklers in church lawns, the far-off pulse of a freight train rolling through the dark. And then, beneath it all, something else. A sound small enough to disappear between heartbeats. A single scream cut off too fast to echo. By sunrise, the neighborhood had that strange brightness that comes only after something bad. Police tape shimmered yellow against palm trunks. Reporters whispered outside the white brick parish of St. Anthony the Martyr, a church so quiet you could hear your own thoughts if you dared to. Inside the fence, detectives moved slow, careful. The grass was wet with dew and blood. The victim was Sister Elena Marquez, 32 years old, missionary, teacher, choir voice so pure it could make people cry during Mass. Found face down beside the side door of the rectory, rosary still in her hand. No wallet, no signs of assault, only a single wound behind her ear. Small, precise, final. The first theory was robbery. The second was anything but. Father Thomas Kearney, parish priest for nearly 3 decades, said he'd heard nothing. He'd locked the chapel at 10, gone to bed. At 5:30, he woke to the sound of the morning bell that rings by itself on a timer. He opened his window and saw a shape near the garden. Thought maybe it was one of the stray cats that lived by the dumpsters. Then he saw the blood. Within an hour, the parking lot was a sea of cruisers and parishioners in disbelief. The headline formed before noon. Miami nun murdered outside parish. Police baffled. The forensics team found footprints. Partial. Faded. Male shoe, size 11. A broken key ring. And a single folded note inside Sister Elena's Bible, discovered later on her desk. 3 words. Forgive me, Father. Written in pencil. No prints. No clue who wrote it. Detectives called it a message. The press called it a confession. The church called it a test of faith. For weeks, the investigation dragged like a hymn that never ends. Interviews, background checks, every volunteer, every parish worker. Nothing. The city moved on. But Coral Grove didn't. The parish emptied out. People stopped leaving candles at the altar. They whispered that God had turned away. Then came the one witness, A maintenance worker named Luis Campos swore he'd seen a man near the rectory the night of the murder, tall, wearing dark clothes, carrying something shiny. But Luis had been drinking that night, his story bending each time he told it. Sometimes the man had a limp, sometimes a hat, sometimes both. The detectives filed it under possible but unreliable. By autumn, the case went cold, evidence boxed, numbered, forgotten. Years bled forward. Coral Grove changed. The parish got new paint, new priests, new parishioners. The garden where Sister Elena died became a parking extension. The memory faded, like it always does, until only the yellowed newspaper clipping on the rectory wall remained. Then 20 years later, a storm. Not the weather kind, but the digital one. A retired Miami-Dade detective named Rafael Santos, now working part-time with the cold case unit, reopened old homicide files for digitization. The Marquez file landed on his desk purely by alphabet. M, middle drawer, bottom shelf. He scanned the paperwork, the Polaroids, the typed witness lists. The line that stopped him wasn't about blood or time of death. It was a forgotten note in the margin of the forensics report. Collect DNA from confessional railing, possible contact trace. He checked the log. The sample had been collected, sealed, stored, and never tested. In 2003, DNA meant months of backlog. Now it meant hours. He sent it to the lab on a Tuesday. By Friday, the result came back. Partial profile, male, matched to an entry in the national database added only 6 months earlier. A church volunteer arrested for an unrelated misdemeanor, fingerprints and DNA automatically logged. The name on the report made Santos sit back in his chair. Michael Donovan. At the time of the murder, Donovan had been 24, youth counselor at St. Anthony's, lead guitarist in the parish choir. He'd left Miami in 2004, moved to Georgia, married, had kids, became a deacon at another church. No record, no rumors. A clean life. Santos didn't tell anyone for 2 days. He just kept staring at the photo. A young man smiling beside Sister Elena at a charity fundraiser, his arm around her shoulder, his smile too wide, his eyes too calm. He drove out to her old parish on Saturday morning. The sun hit the stained glass just like it did in the photos, painting the pews in fractured color. He walked to the garden that wasn't a garden anymore, just asphalt and painted lines. He stood there a long time, wondering how faith could bury a secret so deep it took science 20 years to exhume it. The arrest warrant went out quietly. The department didn't want a scene. The suspect was a church leader now. Loved. Respected. The headline would be explosive. Agents flew to Georgia. They found Donovan preparing Sunday service, microphone in hand, Bible open. They let him finish the prayer before approaching. Michael Donovan? He nodded, smiling politely. You're under arrest for the 2003 murder of Sister Elena Marquez. The congregation froze, gasps. A woman screamed. Someone dropped a hymnal. The footage hit every network by nightfall. Florida 2003 cold case solved. Unexpected arrest shocks church community. But inside the Miami precinct, celebration turned quickly into confusion. The DNA was real, the match undeniable, yet Donovan insisted he was innocent. He didn't even flinch when they told him what the evidence said. He said, "If you found my DNA on that railing, it's because I built it. I repaired it the week before she died." The detectives checked. Maintenance records confirmed he had volunteered for repairs that month. Still, there were inconsistencies. His travel records showed a late-night call from Miami to Georgia days before he supposedly moved. The church phone logs were missing entries. During interrogation, Donovan sat straight, hands folded like prayer. "She forgave me before she died," he said once, softly. "What do you mean?" He looked at the wall. "You wouldn't understand." Santos knew that tone, the one where truth hides inside belief. He pressed harder. "You wrote the note in her Bible?" "I wrote many notes," Donovan said. None meant harm, but the phrase, "forgive me," Father had been written in his handwriting. The lab confirmed it. They'd prepared charges. The community erupted. The same parish that once prayed for justice now divided overnight, half calling it divine revelation, half calling it persecution. Through it all, Santos kept digging. Something about it felt unfinished, like the story had another author. He visited Sister Elena's old apartment, preserved by the church as a memorial. Dust coated everything. On her desk still sat a stack of notebooks filled with sermon drafts and lesson plans. Near the bottom, he found one page different from the rest, a list of names, parishioners, volunteers, each with a date beside it. Every date matched a confession schedule, except the last one, next to Michael Donovan. No date, just one word, pending. Santos stared at it. Pending. It meant she had planned to meet him again. Maybe to forgive him for something. Maybe to confront him. Maybe both. He took the notebook back to the lab. Fingerprints, hers of course, and someone else's, not Donovan's. Someone never in the system. That's when the edges of the case began to blur again. The confession note might not have been a confession. The DNA might have been transfer. The killer might still be unseen, still breathing the same Miami air, watching the news like everyone else, and smiling quietly at the neatness of it all. But the system doesn't wait for certainty. By Monday, the DA filed charges. Donovan was extradited. His photo hit every front page. Deacon arrested in 2003, none murder. In Coral Grove, St. Anthony's held a vigil. Hundreds showed. Candles lined the sidewalk where the body had been found. People prayed for the soul of Sister Elena. Others prayed for the man in chains. Santos didn't attend. He drove instead to the bay, parked near the causeway, and watched the reflection of the city ripple on the water. 20 years, one match, one arrest, and still the truth moved just beneath the surface, distorted, unreachable. Back at the lab, the technician called. "Detective, you need to see this." They'd re-examined the sample from the Bible note. 2 DNA contributors, not one. The first matched Donovan. The second was unknown. Male and newer. Traces of modern polymer from gloves that hadn't existed in 2003. Someone had touched the evidence after it was reopened. Someone inside the department. Santos hung up slowly. The air around him thickened. The Miami 2003 cold case wasn't solved. It was waking up, and for the first time in 2 decades, he felt the old pulse of danger humming beneath the city's calm surface. The sense that somewhere in the choir of saints and sinners, another voice was ready to sing. Miami looked different once a case came back to life. The city didn't change its skyline or its colors, but something in the air shifted, like humidity thickened with memory. Detective Rafael Santos felt it the moment the lab call ended. Someone had touched the evidence after 20 years. Not a technician, not a clerk. Someone who wanted to rewrite the ending. He drove to headquarters before sunrise, the streets still empty, the sky barely grey. The evidence room sat in the basement. Concrete, dust, the faint buzz of refrigeration units keeping ghosts cold. The seal on box M203E, Sister Elena's case, was new. Too new. The label paper still crisp, the tape unwrinkled. Someone had resealed it just days ago, but no log entry showed the request. Santos stood there, listening to the hum of the lights. Every case had a rhythm. He could feel when something was out of tune. This one now played a different key. The crime might have happened 2 decades earlier, but manipulation was current. Whoever had handled the evidence recently was alive, confident, and close. He pulled the logbook, flipped to the last signatures. His own, from last week. A technician's, from the day before that. Then a scrawl he didn't recognize, initials MC. The handwriting rushed, slanted. He took a photo, closed the folder, and walked out before anyone could ask questions. Upstairs, the morning brief began like every other. Budget updates, clearance rates, the same tired optimism. But Santos barely heard it. He kept replaying the possibilities in his head. A clerk relabeling, a careless intern, or something darker. The lab had found modern polymer traces on the Bible note, That meant gloves manufactured after 2016. Someone had opened an old wound and tried to patch it shut with new material. By afternoon, the story had grown legs. Reporters outside the courthouse demanded updates. The church's legal counsel announced a statement of faith in due process, and online forums spun their own theories. The deacon framed, the nun's death part of a cover-up, secret societies hiding behind stained glass. Santos ignored the noise. He cared about paper trails, not hashtags. He visited the county archives, one of those forgotten offices that still smelled of carbon paper and mildew. An older clerk named Esperanza remembered him from other cold cases. "You always look like you're chasing something that doesn't want to be caught," she said, smiling faintly. He showed her the photo of the initials. "Any MC assigned here the last month?" She squinted. "Not in archives, but maybe upstairs, lab logistics. We had a contractor rotation from the state forensic unit. Someone named—" She paused, flipping through a directory. Marcus Cole. The name hit him quietly. Cole had been a junior investigator back in 2003. Ambitious. Sharp. Left the force after a corruption inquiry that never reached trial. Disappeared for years. Now apparently back, under contract. Santos thanked her, took the elevator up, and stood in front of the glass door marked Forensic Operations, authorized entry only. Inside, technicians moved around stainless tables, everything sterile, bright, uncomfortably clean. He asked for Cole. A tech pointed to a small office at the back. Cole looked older than Santos remembered. Grey hair, cropped short, crisp shirt, smile that didn't fit the room. "Detective Santos," he said, standing to shake his hand. "Didn't think we'd meet again in this life." "Neither did I. You signed out evidence from case M203. Routine audit," Cole said easily. "We're digitizing every major case older than 05. Paper fades. Why reseal the box?" "Protocol. Seal broke when we scanned. I replaced it." His answers were smooth, practiced. But something in the rhythm was off. Santos noticed a faint smear of adhesive on Cole's cuff, the same amber hue as the polymer tape used in lab seals. "You handle the items yourself?" "Of course. Chain of custody logged. Except your initials don't match any entry in the digital log." Cole paused, then smiled again. "Then the system glitched. You know how it is." Santos nodded slowly, thanked him, left. But the unease stayed. Glitches don't leave fingerprints. That night he drove without purpose, winding through Coral Grove's back streets. The parish bell rang 8 times, an echo of the morning Sister Elena died. The rectory lights glowed soft, innocent. The new priest had turned the side garden into a playground. Children's laughter floated out where the yellow tape once stood. It should have felt like closure. It didn't. He parked near the seawall, pulled out the photocopy of the note. "Forgive me, Father." The graphite looked darker under streetlight glare. The lab had found 2 DNA profiles. Donovan's, the obvious one, and the second, unknown male with recent polymer. The glove trace. The tampering. What if Cole had touched the note himself? Not out of malice, but design. Testing, retesting, maybe inserting something new, a correction, or a rewrite. Or, the thought chilled him more than any ghost story. He went home, opened his laptop, and typed a memo to himself. If evidence can be rewritten, then the past can be refilmed. Every archive is a stage. He saved it, encrypted, and sat staring at the reflection of the screen until dawn. The next morning brought another storm, literal this time. Heavy rain blurred the city into silver streaks. Santos arrived early, coffee still steaming in one hand, when the captain called him in. "Rafa, you've stirred noise again," she said. "Cole filed a complaint. Says you accused him of falsifying evidence." I asked a question. "Well, stop asking for now. The mayor wants the church quiet, the feds watching. We call this case closed. We all keep our jobs." He didn't argue. He just nodded, because arguing wouldn't matter. Truths that made power uncomfortable always got filed under pending. By noon he was back in the basement, alone again with the boxes. Sometimes answers hid not in the evidence, but in what was missing. He counted every item logged in 2003 against the digital inventory. One photo envelope gone, the scene shots taken by the original evidence photographer, the only full roll of the body before removal. He checked the sign-out record, no entry. Cole's audit had removed more than dust. Santos went to Internalite, requested access to the surveillance logs from the evidence corridor. 2 days were blank. Hard drive maintenance, the log read. Those same 2 days, Cole had been in the building. He leaned back in the chair. The pattern was too deliberate to be coincidence. That evening, he met quietly with Ruiz, his old partner, the one still inside homicide. They sat in a diner near the station, rain dripping off their coats, coffee going cold. "I need to know if you've seen Cole near my unit," Santos said. Ruiz frowned. "Cole? Thought he was freelancing for the lab." "He was inside the archives, took files from Marquez." Ruiz stirred his coffee. "He shouldn't have clearance for that. You think he's covering someone?" Santos looked out the window at the streaming traffic. "Or rewriting someone." They sat in silence a while, the kind that feels like two detectives standing at the edge of something neither wants to name. Finally, Ruiz said, "You know this'll blow back on you." Santos nodded. It already has. When he left the diner, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. "Stop rewriting what's finished." No sender. No location, just those words. He looked around. No one. Only the reflection of headlights on wet pavement. The next day, he visited the church again, this time unannounced. The new priest, Father Elias, led him to Sister Elena's old classroom, now a storage space. On the back shelf, forgotten under hymnals, he found a box marked Donovan Youth Program, 2003. Inside were videotapes, mini-DV format, the kind used for parish events. He borrowed them for digital preservation. Back at the lab, he converted one. Children singing, parishioners clapping. Then, frame by frame, he noticed something in the background. A man adjusting a camera on a tripod, far from the crowd. Marcus Cole, 20 years younger, already there, already filming. The date stamp matched the week of the murder. Santos leaned back, heart pounding slow and heavy. Cole wasn't rewriting evidence. He'd been inside the story from the start. He copied the footage onto a separate drive, labeled it Marquez, secondary source, locked it in his desk drawer. By the time he returned home, a thin envelope waited under his door. No name. Inside, a single photograph, grainy, printed from old video. It showed him, standing in the evidence room that morning, hand on box M203E. On the back, handwritten in pencil, "Forgive me, detective." The same script as the note from 2003. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time, rain hitting the window in rhythmic bursts. He realized the handwriting on the new note wasn't old. It was pressure fresh. The graphite hadn't even dulled. Someone was leaving him a message from inside the building. The storm outside thickened into thunder. He reached for his phone, then stopped. No one to call, no one to trust. Instead, he opened his recorder and spoke, voice steady, quiet. "If this reaches anyone, know that the Miami 2003 case isn't closed. The evidence is alive. Someone inside wants it to stay that way, and I think the story's being rewritten faster than I can tell it." He saved the file, closed his eyes, and listened to the rain, wondering which sound would stop first, the storm outside or the heartbeat inside the city's archive walls. It started with a sound he couldn't place, a soft, irregular tapping somewhere above the ceiling tiles in his office, like rain that had lost its way and decided to fall inside the building. Detective Rafael Santos sat at his desk, staring at the envelope on the blotter as if it might grow teeth. The photograph inside showed him in the evidence room with his hand on the Marquez box, the caption on the back written in the same careful pencil as, "Forgive me, Father." It should have felt like a threat. It felt more like a verdict. Someone else was narrating his life now, one frame at a time. Outside the window, Miami went through its bright routines. Buses blew exhaust, delivery trucks double-parked. Someone laughed too loud on the sidewalk, as if the city weren't sitting on 2 decades of unanswered questions. The building smelled of old paper and coffee burned down to sludge. Cold cases typically died quietly, buried under fresher tragedies. This one was doing the opposite. It was waking up and asking questions of its own. He turned the photo over again and again, memorizing the grain, the angle, the slight blur at the edges. It wasn't a mobile snapshot. It had the flat, distant look of security footage printed out by someone who had time and access. That meant the watcher wasn't outside peeking in. They were inside the system itself, moving through the same corridors he walked every day. Downstairs, the Marquez file sat in its refrigerated drawer, sitting under a sticker that said, "Closed." On paper, the story was already wrapped. A nun killed outside her parish, the killer finally brought to justice through a miracle of DNA, an arrest that shook a church community that had thought itself safe. The headline ran clean and sharp across television keyruns. Miami, 2003 cold case solved. Unexpected arrest rocks church community. It was the kind of narrative people loved. Late justice, modern science, righteous shock. But narratives that neat always left things out. He went back to the field that afternoon, just to breathe air that hadn't passed through police vents. Coral Grove felt smaller now, not because the streets had shrunk, but because he knew every corner that had once been taped and numbered. The church facade gleamed, renovated, the white cross at the peak bright against the sky. Families moved in and out of the parish hall, gripping potluck dishes and toddlers. They walked over ground they didn't know was haunted, their shoes scuffing concrete, poured over what had been a crime scene 20 years before. Inside, candles flickered beneath a framed photograph of Sister Elena. Someone had added a second photo now, printed from recent news coverage. Michael Donovan in handcuffs, head bowed, flanked by deputies in plain clothes. Between the 2 images lay a folded bulletin from last Sunday's Mass. On the back, in small print, the parish statement. We pray for truth, for mercy, for healing. We trust in the process. Trust in the process, he repeated under his breath, standing beneath stained glass saints that had watched over quieter scandals for decades. He slid into a back pew, watched the sanctuary like it was a stage between performances. Details stood out when people weren't looking. The worn patch on the confessional railing where hundreds of hands had rested, the faint scratch marks on the side door to the rectory, the way the morning light didn't quite reach the corner where the camera in the old footage had once stood. He could almost see it there, the invisible lens that had recorded more than anyone meant to show. His thoughts kept circling back to Marcus Cole. In the youth program tapes, Cole had been a ghost at the edge of frames, always near the equipment, never at the center. Back then, he'd been just another ambitious kid with a badge and a knack for tech, the guy you called when the VCR ate the evidence tape. Now he was a contracted operator with keys to the same rooms Santos once thought were secure. People who handled the record would always know more than those who only read it. He met with internal affairs, not because he trusted them, but because the rule book demanded it. The IA lieutenant listened in silence as he laid out the missing photo envelope, the unlogged seal, the blank security days, the text that felt more like liturgy than threat. When he finished, the lieutenant tapped a pen against his notepad. You're suggesting Cole deliberately altered evidence in a 20-year-old homicide to, what, frame a deacon? I'm suggesting someone with his access has been inside that box more recently than any log says, Santos replied, and that the timing lines up suspiciously well with a DNA miracle that solved a headline just when the department needed good press. The lieutenant sighed. You know how this sounds. You're building a conspiracy on top of an already sensitive case involving a church that donates a lot to city programs. I'm describing a pattern, Santos said, and patterns don't care about politics. In the end, IA opened a preliminary inquiry, which in department language meant they were logging his concern while quietly hoping it evaporated. He left the meeting with a copy of his own statement in his hand and the distinct sense that he was stepping onto a different kind of stage, one with better lighting and sharper microphones. The media pressure doubled. Calls came in from networks wanting a quote, an anonymous insight, a leak. He declined them all, but he watched every segment. He studied what they chose to show: the parish facade, Donovan's booking photo, the file boxes rolling on carts in B-roll, the sound bites from church members divided between outrage and denial. No one showed the evidence room. No one mentioned the tapes buried under old hymnals. No one spoke the name Marcus Cole on air. The story the public saw had clean edges, the story in his head frayed at every corner. At home, the case followed him. He found himself checking his apartment for cameras he knew he'd never find, glancing up at street lamps as if they were holding secret eyes. The smallest things became suspicious. The way the mail slot creaked exactly once at 3 a.m., the blinking cursor on his computer when he opened old reports, the mirrored surface of his microwave door reflecting his face in ghostly double, while the evening news reran the cold case segment for the third night in a row. He began talking quietly into a voice recorder before bed, capturing thoughts that felt too fragile for paper. He described his doubts, his flashbacks to the 2003 scene he had visited but not led, the way younger versions of himself had accepted unknown offender as an endpoint instead of a challenge. He described the growing feeling that the case wasn't just about who had killed a nun, but about who got to decide that answer and when. Faith crept into it more than he liked. Not the faith preached from pulpits, but the faith institutions demanded from anyone who worked under fluorescent lights and filing cabinets: faith in procedure, faith in logs, faith in signatures. If those could be bent quietly by a careful hand and a fresh roll of tape, what was left? He paid another visit to Donovan in lockup. The deacon sat on the other side of the glass, orange jumpsuit replacing choir robes, eyes ringed by sleepless shadows. "You came back," Donovan said, picking up the phone. "Have they found what you missed yet?" Santos studied him. "What do you think I missed?" "The parts that aren't on record," Donovan said. "The conversations that never got written down, the confessions that didn't fit the form. Elena wrote your name in her planner," Santos said, "marked you as pending for a second talk, the day after she died." Donovan stared through him. "She wanted to talk about a project, a new youth outreach. She said she'd heard some things about someone else, someone using the confessional for the wrong kind of secrets. She never told me who." "Did you ever see Cole around her?" Santos asked. "The tech kid?" Donovan frowned. "He was everywhere. In the choir loft, the office, the rectory. If there was a cable to run or a camera to adjust, he had the key. Half the time, I didn't know if he was working for the department or the church." Santos felt the chill in that sentence. Lines that blurred 20 years ago have a way of becoming walls later. "When they arrested me," Donovan continued, "they showed me the note. Forgive me, Father. They said only a guilty man would write that, but that's what everyone says in there." He nodded toward where an invisible confessional might be. "Every Friday, every Saturday. Those 3 words are the price of entry. If you lift them out of context, you can pin them on anyone you want." On the way back to the station, that stuck with him. Lift words out of context, and they can mean anything you need them to. Lift evidence out of timeline, and it can point anywhere you want. He requested the full list of cases Cole had audited since returning as a contractor. The spreadsheet arrived in his inbox that night. Dozens of cold files, all involving partial evidence, all older than 15 years. A pattern emerged. Small changes in the logs, minor adjustments in the chain of custody, nothing big enough alone to scream tampering, but together forming a quiet melody of interference. He mapped the dates against media coverage. Each audit coincided with a spike in coverage of unsolved crimes in that category. Stories about justice delayed, families still waiting, communities demanding closure. It was like someone was reading the city's appetite and seasoning the archives accordingly. When he realized that, the case shifted in his mind. It was no longer just about truth versus lies, but about supply and demand. The public wanted endings, institutions wanted resolved cases, churches wanted closure, politics wanted a good headline, and somewhere in the middle, someone like Cole learned how to nudge the past just enough to create them. The next envelope arrived 3 days later, this time slid under his car windshield wiper in the station parking lot. No address, no stamp. Inside, a single printed screenshot from local news. The cold case segment paused on the freeze frame where the anchor said, "Tonight, at 11, the answers Miami has waited 20 years for." Across the bottom of the image, in pencil, who wrote this script? He stood there in the heat, traffic boiling by, holding the question in his fingers. For the first time, he understood that he wasn't just chasing a killer, he was chasing an author. That night, he opened a new folder on his home computer and named it something simple. Unwritten. Inside, he started assembling a different version of the story. One that didn't start with a solved cold case, but with a community that had been given a comfortable lie. One that didn't end with a handcuffed deacon, but with a question about who had chosen him out of all the possible suspects, and why. He typed in the dark, the glow of the screen casting faint reflections off the window glass. For a moment he thought he saw movement outside, a shadow shifting, a glimpse of a figure watching from the sidewalk. When he leaned closer, all he saw was himself, framed in his own light. He kept writing anyway. Somewhere, he knew, there were people who believed in the official version of events because they had to. Their faith, whether in God, in law, or in the nightly news, couldn't handle another crack. But there would also be others, the ones who always read past the headline, who would hear something in his unofficial account that didn't match what they'd been shown and decide to look closer. He wasn't sure which group would win. He just knew that as long as the box in the basement hummed quietly behind its closed sticker, while anonymous notes appeared in his life like stage directions, the Miami 2003 case remained exactly what it had always been, a story still waiting for its real last line. And for the first time in years, Santos realized he might not be trying to solve a cold case anymore. He might be trying to keep it from being solved the wrong way. The file on his screen stopped being a document and started feeling like a confession. Lines of text stacked up, dense and insistent, not written like a report, but like someone trying to talk faster than the room could listen. The more Detective Rafael Santos put into unwritten, the more he felt a strange, quiet pressure building around him, as if the walls of his office were leaning in to read over his shoulder. The official case file lived in the department's system, clean, time-stamped, sanitized. His version lived in a hidden folder under a false name on a laptop that suddenly seemed far too connected to everything else. He started to work differently. No more casual conversations in hallways, no more quick updates over coffee. He stopped printing anything. When he needed to think, he took a walk instead of opening his email. The city outside became his office, the stretch of Citol where the wind was too loud for microphones to pick up, the back pew of St. Anthony's during weekday afternoons when only a handful of elderly parishioners muttered prayers under their breath, the corner of a laundromat where the constant churn of machines drowned out any subtle recording. Patterns began to crystallize in his mind, Cole's name showing up near sensitive cases, the timing of breakthroughs lined up against dips in public trust, budget hearings, election cycles. Cold cases thawed just when a press conference needed good news. Not many, just enough to create the illusion that justice, while slow, always arrived in the end. A neat pattern, comforting to reporters and voters, terrifying to anyone who had ever watched an evidence seal peel up under a stranger's hand. He couldn't prove this intent yet, but he could see the choreography. It was like watching a magician's trick in slow motion. Once you know where the hand is moving, you can never unsee it. The Donovan case became the centerpiece, not because of the victim, not because of the suspect, but because of the collision it represented. Faith, law, media, and memory all pressing against each other around one headline. Miami, 2003, cold case solved. Unexpected arrest rocks church community. 8 words that suggested a complete story. None of them mentioned tampering, missing photos, or a man who had quietly handled both cameras and evidence. Santos decided he needed someone outside the system to see what he saw. Not to leak, not yet, but to anchor his version somewhere that couldn't be erased with a keystroke and a fresh roll of tape. He called a woman he trusted halfway. Mariana Cruz, a local columnist known for writing about the spaces between official narratives. She didn't do crime reporting, but she did patterns, systems, damage. They met in a noisy cafe near downtown, ceiling fans moving the heat in slow circles. She wore headphones around her neck like armor, and watched him with the wary curiosity of someone who'd been burned by sources before. "You're not my usual beat," she said. "Cops only call me when they want to complain about city council." "I'm not complaining," he said. "Not about budgets, about authorship." She tilted her head. That's new. He didn't give her names. Not yet. He laid out shapes instead. How evidence could be nudged. How chain of custody logs could be technically correct and materially misleading. How a single cold case could be steered toward the neatest possible culprit with the right combination of timing, pressure, and invisible edits. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, stirring her coffee, "that some of our cleanest justice after many years' stories might be curated." "I'm telling you," he replied, "that we've gotten used to thinking of archives as neutral. But everything that gets saved is a choice. Everything that goes missing is also a choice. And you?" she asked. "What choice are you making?" "I'm writing the version that doesn't fit on a lower third," he said. She was quiet for a moment, eyes scanning his face like a polygraph. "If I poke this at the wrong angle and you're wrong, I destroy someone's life. If I poke it the right angle and you're right, I burn bridges I can never rebuild." "Welcome to the club," he said tiredly. She didn't promise a story. She promised a folder. "Send me what you have," she said. "Not the official file. Your version. It goes in a box with a note that says, 'Open when the system finally admits it's tired of lying.' I can't print that tomorrow, but I can make sure it doesn't vanish." It wasn't enough. It was more than he'd had the day before. He went back to the station feeling both heavier and lighter, like someone had just witnessed his doubt and decided it was at least worth archiving. He still had to live with the official story, though. The DA's office scheduled a pre-trial meeting. He sat at the end of the conference table while prosecutors clicked through slides designed for juries and news cameras. Photo of Sister Elena, timeline of the night, DNA chart linking Donovan to the confessional railing, still image of the note with its haunting 3 words. When he asked about the second DNA profile on the note, the one with modern polymer, the lead prosecutor waved a hand. "Lab contamination. It happens all the time. We can handle that in motions if the defense brings it up." "And the missing photo envelope?" he pressed. "The evidence room video gaps?" "Detective, juries don't like messy. You give them too many shadows, they start seeing ghosts instead of facts." He stared at the screen. "Sometimes the shadows are where the truth is." "Sometimes," the prosecutor said. "The shadows are where reasonable doubt lives. And our job isn't to write your perfect version of events. It's to win a conviction based on what a jury can accept." That was it. The line that snapped something in him, not because it was new, but because he'd heard it too many times. Cases reduced to chess moves. People's lives turned into arguments about what was emotionally plausible under fluorescent lights. After the meeting, Cole was waiting in the hallway, leaning against a file cabinet like he belonged there. His smile was casual, his eyes not. "Heard you're making waves," Cole said. "Again. Just trying to keep the record honest?" Santos said. "The record," Cole repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. "You still think that thing in the basement is the record? Those boxes are just props. The real script is written in what people remember from the headline. Everything else is footnotes. You messed with those props," Santos said quietly. "You signed your initials where they don't belong." Cole's smile didn't move, but the air around it cooled. Careful, detective. Accusations sound a lot like confessions when they're not backed by anything solid. You start questioning every piece of evidence. You don't clear a path to truth. You just burn down confidence in the whole system. Then what? Then maybe we stop pretending closure is more important than accuracy. Santos shot back. Cole shrugged. Or maybe we learn that some stories need an ending more than they need endless questions. People sleep better that way. The casual cynicism of it hit harder than any shouting match could have. Santos realized then that he and Cole weren't just on different sides of an investigation. They were on different sides of what stories were for. For Santos, stories were attempts to approach truth. For Cole, stories were tools to maintain order. He didn't argue further. He just walked away, because anger was loud and the building had too many ears. That night, Unwritten grew by another dozen paragraphs. He described the hallway conversation almost verbatim, the way Cole's voice had carried over the hum of printers, the way the fluorescent light had turned his eyes colorless. He wrote about the DA's PowerPoint slides like a priest critiquing a sermon that hit all the right notes and none of the right questions. Then, for the first time, he printed a copy. Just one. He folded it, put it in a plain envelope, and taped it under the bottom drawer of his kitchen cabinet at home. An analog backup in a world where digital traces could be edited with a few keystrokes and a convincing audit log. 2 days later, he came home to find that envelope sitting neatly in the middle of his kitchen table. Nothing else in the apartment had moved. No broken locks, no overturned drawers, no signs of chaos. Just the rearranged truth. Someone had been there, had found the one thing he'd tried to keep off the network, and had chosen to move it instead of taking it. On the front of the envelope, in pencil, 4 new words appeared. This version is interesting. He sat down slowly, heart hammering. The kitchen felt smaller, the refrigerator hummed louder. He opened the envelope. The pages were all there, but now faint pencil marks ran along the margins. Underlines, circling phrases, small check marks next to certain sentences, as if an editor had gone through his work. Beside one line, "Sometimes the shadows are where the truth is," someone had written, "Good line, too honest for daytime." Santos laughed once, a sound closer to a cough. The idea that whoever was orchestrating this mess had not only broken into his home but also taken time to critique his writing was absurd enough to almost break the tension. Almost. He pulled out his phone, thought about calling it in, then pictured the report. Unknown party broke into underpaid detective's apartment, corrected his personal manifesto, did not steal TV. No one would assign a unit. They'd suggest stress leave. Instead, he added a new rule to his life. Assume nothing you write is ever truly private. Not the official reports, not the hidden files, not the notes you tape under drawers. If they were going to read his script anyway, he might as well decide how it played. He started recording things differently at work, not just in case files, but in ways that couldn't be easily edited. Casual comments in crowded rooms. Questions raised in group emails with too many CCs to erase cleanly. Mentions of unresolved chain of custody questions dropped into meetings where someone was always taking minutes. He wasn't blowing a whistle. He was seeding the ground, planting future exhibits. He also formalized one move he'd been avoiding. He went to the courthouse alone and filed a sealed affidavit with the clerk, under oath, detailing his concerns about tampering in the Marquez case. No accusations, just observations and questions, locked into the system in a way that required a judge to break open. The clerk stamped it without comment, slid it into the machine that eats paper, and turns it into official record. For the first time since the DNA hit, Santos felt a small flicker of something like control. Not victory. Not yet. Just a stake hammered quietly into the ground. Outside, the courthouse steps were lined with cameras waiting for someone else. A different hearing. A different scandal. No one noticed him heading down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, collar up against the heat. He reached the bottom of the steps, just as a voice behind him said, "Detective, big day." He turned. A camera lens looked back at him from the sidewalk. Local news, but not one of the crews he recognized. The photographer held it low, off his shoulder. The reporter beside him smiled a practiced, easy smile. "Anything you want to say about the Donovan trial?" she asked. "No comment," he said reflexively. "On or off the record? Same answer both ways." She nodded, unfazed. "Fair enough. Mind if we grab some B-roll of you walking away pensively?" He almost smiled. "Do I get to pick the headline that goes under it?" "They don't let us do that," she said. "We just fill the frames." That line stuck as he walked away. The newsroom didn't write the lower third either. It came from somewhere up the chain, people who liked their narratives tight and their resolutions tidy. Even here, at the courthouse steps, the people holding the cameras weren't the true authors. They were just operators. He glanced back once and caught his own image reflected in the lens. A man walking down stone steps, anonymous in a suit easily cut into any story that needed a contemplative cop. Somewhere, he knew, there were other cameras he couldn't see. Not news crews, not security domes, quiet ones, the kind that had followed him into evidence rooms and kitchens. Let them record, he thought. He'd just made sure that whatever they filmed would have to compete with something else, something sworn, sealed, and shelved in a courthouse that still believed, stubbornly, in the weight of signed paper. The Miami 2003 cold case had an official ending now, at least on the surface. A suspect in custody, a trial date moving into view. But beneath that, another story was still writing itself. One memo, one marginal note, one sealed affidavit at a time. The real question wasn't who had killed a nun outside a church 20 years ago. The real question was who, in the end, would get to decide what that meant. The affidavit didn't make a sound when it slid into the courthouse system, but Santos could feel the echo of it anyway, like a low note under a piece of music that only certain ears were tuned to hear. Officially, it was nothing dramatic. A sworn statement filed under seal, flagged as supplemental information relevant to a pending homicide case. No press release, no email chain, no memo blasted to all hands. Just pages, ink, a clerk's stamp. But the thing about paper is that once it's sitting in a drawer with the court's crest on top, it acquires a weight even digital files can't quite imitate. It becomes something the machine has to at least pretend to respect. The ripples started small. A quiet request from the judge's clerk to the DA's office, clarification regarding allegations of potential evidence irregularities made by a lead investigator. A frown at the prosecutor's desk. A call to the captain. "Did you know your detective is questioning the integrity of his own case?" Then a meeting, behind a door with frosted glass. Voices low but tense enough that the tone leaked into the hallway. When Santos was called up, the captain's expression had moved past irritation into something more brittle. Not anger. Not yet. Something like fear wrapped in professionalism. "You filed an affidavit without notifying the chain of command," she said. No preamble, no small talk. "I filed under oath," he replied. "The chain of command doesn't outrank that. You're suggesting tampering inside our house. Do you know how that reads? To a judge? To the public? This case is already sensitive, and now you've implied—" "I've described facts," he said. "Missing photos, unlogged seals, DNA with modern polymer trace on a 2-decade-old note. If I pretend I didn't see any of that, that reads worse." She leaned back, eyes on him like he'd become a witness instead of an officer. "You're turning one messy box into a crusade. I'm trying to stop a bad ending from getting printed in stone." "The ending, detective, is not up to you." He almost said, "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." Instead, he asked, "Am I off the case?" There was the briefest pause. Then, "You're reassigned. Temporarily. Let the trial unit handle it from here." "Reassigned to what?" "Internal Review Advisory. Since you like looking under rugs, we'll give you a broom. Go through old evidence room audits, help I understand patterns. Congratulations, you're promoted to professional skeptic." It was meant as a reprimand. It sounded closer to an accidentally honest job description. The news of his reassignment leaked before the memo was even typed. It always did. Hallway whispers shifted when he walked by. Some colleagues gave him sympathetic nods that said I'd keep my head down if I were you. Others avoided his eyes, like whatever he was carrying might be contagious. In a department built on trust and suspicion in roughly equal measure, no one wanted to be the next one mentioned in an affidavit. Outside the building, the story took on a new layer. A local blog that thrived on leaks posted an anonymous tip. Sources say, lead detective in high-profile church cold case removed amid internal questions about evidence handling. The piece was short, speculation wrapped in cautious language, but the effect was immediate. Comment sections filled with two kinds of people, those convinced the justice system was crumbling, and those convinced woke cops were sabotaging their own work. For the church, it was another blow. St. Anthony's had spent weeks trying to steady itself after news that a beloved former youth leader was the prime suspect in a nun's murder. Now parishioners stood in the lobby after Mass, talking not about forgiveness or doctrine, but about affidavits and forensic integrity. Father Elias fielded questions he'd never trained for. Can we still trust the case? Is he being framed? Is this persecution or incompetence or both? At a community meeting called to soothe nerves, a parish council member quoted scripture about truth coming to light, about secrets shouted from rooftops. But the people in folding chairs weren't listening for theology. They were listening for reassurance that the world still worked the way they thought it did, that sins were punished, that systems could correct themselves, that stories had reliable narrators. The more the speakers tried to smooth the narrative, the more jittery the room grew. Santos didn't attend the meeting. He watched the footage later on a low-resolution clip someone uploaded. He muted the sound, letting himself focus only on how people moved. Nervous hands, restless shoulders, glances toward the camera. Everyone looked like they were waiting for someone off-screen to step forward with the line that would make it all make sense. No one did. In his new advisory role, he dove into audits like a man searching back through old dreams for the first time he woke up sweating. IA handed him stacks of reports, inventory reconciliations, seal integrity logs, digital access histories. On the surface, everything looked dull, bureaucratic. Numbers matched boxes, barcodes matched entries. But as the days passed, he started to see the same faint fingerprints of pattern that had drawn him to the Marquez file. Certain years showed small spikes in unlogged access, corrections. Certain technicians' usernames appeared in clusters around cases that later made news under triumphant banners. Decades-old murder solved by new tech. City celebrates closure in cold case. A few of those usernames belonged to people who had since retired. One belonged to Cole. He chased that name across the spreadsheets like a low note repeating in a song. Everywhere Cole had helped with legacy evidence. Something coincidental seemed to happen within months. A new tip surfaced. A partial print suddenly matched. A forgotten witness came forward. Nothing overtly illegal on paper, nothing that screamed crime. Just fortuitous alignment between public hunger for resolution and archived material that suddenly decided to speak. He brought this to I. The lieutenant flipped through the highlighted pages, lips pressed tight. Patterns are not proof, she said. You know that. They're where we start looking, he replied. If this was a serial case, these alignments would be enough to get task forces formed. This isn't a serial case. This is your doubt looking for a frame. He almost laughed. Everything's looking for a frame. That's my point. Still, he could tell something had landed. The lieutenant didn't close the file. She set it aside, separate from the others, and he saw her slip it into a drawer that locked. The next day, Mariana Cruz called. I read through what you sent, she said without hello. Plus some public records of my own. You know what worries me most? It's not the possibility that evidence has been nudged. It's how easily a narrative can be professionally marketed, once that happens. Meaning? He asked, though he already knew. Meaning, she said, that once an institution decides which version of events is responsible to promote, anyone questioning it gets painted as either disloyal or unstable. And that creates the perfect environment for someone like your friend in forensics to do small edits without much fear. Are you going to write about it? Not yet, she said. I pitched a column about how we over-celebrate cold case miracles without asking what structural needs they might be serving. My editor said it sounded like I was trying to ruin people's hope. A beat. But I'm keeping the file. If your affidavit ever surfaces, I'll be ready. Hope. That was the word that hung in the air after she hung up. People say they want truth, but most days what they really want is hope shaped like truth. A press conference that makes them feel safer driving home at night. A headline that tells them horrible things get resolved eventually. The Miami 2003 case had checked all those boxes. A nun, a church, a repentant-looking suspect, DNA, a detective in front of microphones using phrases like breakthrough and finally bring closure. Now that neat package had a crack in it. The crack wasn't big enough yet to break the box, but it was there. And cracks have a way of spreading once you notice them. At the courthouse, pre-trial hearings began. Santos had a subpoena as a witness to early investigative steps, even though he'd been reassigned. The first time he took the stand in the small, echo-prone courtroom, he could feel eyes on him from more directions than the benches actually contained. The DA's questions were crisp, designed to reinforce the story the jury would one day be fed. Yes, the body was found here. Yes, the note was recovered there. Yes, Donovan had known Sister Elena. Yes, he had been scheduled to meet her again. Then came the defense attorney. Slower, voice more conversational. Detective Santos, she said. Is it true you recently filed a sealed affidavit raising questions about the handling of evidence in this case? The DA bristled. Objection! The judge frowned. Counsel, the existence of sealed material is not for discussion at this phase. The defense backed off, but the question hung in the air like smoke. Jurors weren't present. This was pre-trial, but others were. Clerks, reporters, a few curious members of the public. The idea that even the lead investigator had doubts would travel, no matter how the transcript redacted it. Afterward, in the hallway, Cole appeared again, as if summoned by the scent of tension. Careful, he said, falling into step beside Santos. You're letting them write you as the conflicted cop. That role doesn't end well. You seem familiar with roles, Santos replied. What's yours? Editor? Ghostwriter? Cole's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm just a technician. I keep the archives tidy. The mess, detective, comes from people like you who don't know when to stop adding footnotes. They parted ways at the elevator. Santos took the stairs instead. As weeks passed, the pressure shifted from external to internal. Santos began to notice small delays when he requested minor things, IT taking a little longer to answer, clerks needing more approvals to hand over logs he used to access freely. Not obstruction exactly, more like friction, enough grains of sand in the gears to remind him he was out of favor. Yet, at the same time, quiet support appeared in corners he hadn't expected. A younger officer slipped him a thumb drive with unedited body cam footage from a recent evidence transport that contradicted a log entry by a familiar name. A former lab tech sent an anonymous email outlining how informal fixes to older files had become normalized under the guise of catching up with modern standards. None of it was bombshell-proof. All of it were strands in a web. Sitting at his kitchen table one night, surrounded by printouts and scribbled notes, Santos realized something that shifted the weight in his chest. He might never get the clean revelation scene he'd unconsciously been chasing. No dramatic confession from Cole. No hidden tape where someone admits on camera to manufacturing closure. The truth here wasn't a single act. It was a culture, a set of habits, a series of tiny, rationalized decisions made by people who told themselves they were serving the greater good. That kind of truth doesn't explode. It erodes. He thought of the original headline again. Miami 2003 cold case solved. Unexpected arrest rocks church community. He wondered what it would look like if someone wrote it differently in 10 years, after enough cracks had been forced open. Maybe Miami 2003 cold case reshaped. Evidence questions shake public faith. Maybe archives under scrutiny as old case reveals new doubts. Maybe nothing at all. Maybe the story would sink into the digital avalanche, remembered only by a few people who felt something off and couldn't fully articulate why. He opened Unwritten and added a new passage, not about evidence this time, but about all the people orbiting the case. The parishioners who just wanted to pray without thinking about lab contamination, the prosecutors who believed in their work even as they streamlined narratives, the journalists who fought for space to complicate the story and sometimes lost, the detectives like him who realized too late that the machinery they worked inside had more authors than they'd ever counted. He wrote that the cold case was no longer just a file or a trial. It was a mirror. And everyone who looked into it saw a slightly different reflection of what they thought justice was supposed to look like. When he finished, he didn't hide this version under the drawer. He emailed it to Mariana, to his own personal account, to an encrypted backup. Then he sat back, listening to the quiet of his apartment, half expecting another envelope to slide under the door, another penciled critique in the margins. None came that night. For the first time in months, he realized, the story had been pushed forward by his hand, not theirs. Small move, maybe. Temporary. But it was something. The case of Sister Elena Marquez still didn't have a truthful, agreed-on ending. Donovan's guilt or innocence was still tangled in arguments and evidence, both clean and contaminated. Cole was still in the building, somewhere between cameras and cabinets. The church still lit candles beneath her photograph. Nothing was resolved. But the question of who got to say it was resolved. That was no longer quiet. And in a city built on lights and reflections, sometimes that was the only way a cold case really started to thaw. Not with a final answer, but with enough people finally learning to see the frame. The first sign that the affidavit had actually landed wasn't an explosion. It was a memo. A single line, buried halfway down a court order that slipped through the department email like any other PDF. Counsel will appear for in-camera discussion regarding sealed concerns over evidence handling in State v. Donovan. No details, no fireworks, just enough words to say a judge had read what Rafael Santos wrote and decided it couldn't be ignored. They brought him into chambers on a Tuesday afternoon. No jury, no gallery, no cameras. Just the judge, 2 prosecutors, the defense, a court reporter, and the quiet hum of an air vent that sounded like static on an old tape. Santos sat at the end of the table, feeling more like a piece of evidence than a witness. "Detective," the judge began, glasses low on his nose, "your affidavit suggests irregularities in the chain of custody for certain items in the Marquez file. I want you to restate, briefly, what you observed." The DA shifted in his seat. The defense counsel leaned forward, eyes sharp. Santos chose his words like someone placing glass on a shelf. He described the missing photo envelope, the unlogged seal, the second DNA profile on the Bible note laced with modern polymer. He did not speculate. He did not accuse by name. He stated facts and let the pattern hang in the air. The judge listened without interruption. When he finished, the prosecutor jumped in with context, backlog pressures, lab improvements, how cold case handling in 2003 did not meet current standards. The defense seized on phrases like possible contamination and unlogged access, trying to wedge them into a narrative of systemic unreliability. The judge eventually raised a hand. "We are not retrying the entire history of forensic science today," he said. "The question is whether these issues are substantial enough that the defense should be allowed to explore them at trial." He turned to Santos. "Detective, despite your concerns, do you believe the underlying evidence was fabricated?" Santos held his gaze. Fabricated? No, Your Honor. I believe it was steered, selected, highlighted in a way that may not reflect the full complexity of what was originally collected. The judge sat back, cheeks tightening, as if the word steered hit some place deeper than he'd planned. After a long moment, he issued his ruling. The evidence would stay in, but the defense would be given leeway to question how it was handled. The jury would, one day, get to hear about the cracks. It was a partial win for everyone, and no one at once. The DA stormed out afterward without meeting his eyes. The defense lawyer gave him a small nod that landed somewhere between gratitude and calculation. Outside in the marble corridor, the sound of footsteps echoed like a metronome. Cole was waiting near the elevators, as if he'd known the schedule all along. "Big moment," he said lightly. "You just gave the defense a flashlight for our archives." "Maybe the archives needed one," Santos replied. Cole smiled. "You really believe juries want to hear about nuance? They want villains and victims, not metadata. Maybe they deserve both," Santos said. Cole's smile faded a fraction. "Careful, detective. When you teach people to doubt the record, they don't stop at the parts you think are broken. They start doubting everything. That's how you lose the whole story." He stepped into the elevator, doors sliding shut between them with a soft, final whisper. By evening, someone had leaked the existence of the Chambers conference. The next morning's crawl on a cable channel read, "Cold case trial clouded by questions over evidence chain. Lead detective reassigned after raising concerns." The story didn't have details, but it had enough fodder for pundits. One talked about heroic whistleblowers. Another muttered about rogue cops undermining their own cases. A third asked why the public was only hearing about this now. At St. Anthony's, the bulletin board filled with more questions than announcements. Some parishioners defended the system out of habit. Others whispered that maybe Donovan had been chosen because his fall would be digestible. Tragic, but safe. Better a deacon in another state than someone higher up, closer to the core. The murder itself, the night, the body, those details became background noise against the louder debate over process and trust. Santos watched it all from the periphery, feeling both responsible and oddly distant. He hadn't created the cracks. He'd only traced their outline with a pen the court couldn't ignore. Mariana called again. "This is shifting," she said. "Your affidavit's existence is public enough that it's shaping how people talk, even if they can't see what's inside it. I can't print that document, but I can write about what it represents." "What does it represent?" he asked, curious how his messy paragraphs looked from outside. "A split," she said, "between those who need clean narratives to function and those who are willing to live with unresolved ones. You know, most people will choose the clean version, right?" "Yes," he said. "But if even a few see the seams, that matters. I'm drafting a column," she continued, "not about Marquez directly or Donovan or your department, our lawyers would faint, but about curated closure, about how we consume these decades-later justice stories without asking who benefits from their timing. I won't name you. You'll recognize yourself anyway." He almost smiled. "You sure you want the mail that's going to bring?" "I write for people who read past headlines," she said. "The rest were never mine to keep." Internal affairs, meanwhile, had its own ripples. While officially he was just an advisor, Santos could sense a subtle shift in the way the IA lieutenant looked at the audit printouts now. Less like noise, more like potential insulation. If the department ever got hit hard, lawsuits, media, political heat, being able to say, "We identified concerns and were addressing patterns," would be valuable. One afternoon she called him in and closed the door. "Off the record," she said, "if we could prove that certain practices in evidence handling were sloppy but not malicious, what would you consider enough?" "Enough for what?" he asked. "To start repairing trust without burning the building down." The phrase hung there, heavy. Without burning the building down. "I don't want flames," he said. "I want honest labels. I want boxes that say contaminated or unreliable when that's what they are, not closed just because it's tidy. I want us to stop treating a conviction as the same thing as the truth. We can't run a system on philosophical distinctions, she said quietly. Maybe that's why we're here, he replied. The next move came from Cole, not through official channels, but through a text from a number that used to be his office line. Need to talk off-site. Not a threat. A courtesy. Parish parking lot tonight, 9. He considered ignoring it. Decided that not knowing what Cole wanted would be worse than hearing it. St. Anthony's lot at night was a sheet of grey under soft sodium lights. The building loomed white and calm, stained glass dark from the outside. The spot where Sister Elena had fallen was now a painted line between two spaces. The wind carried the faint scent of incense from the earlier evening mass. Cole leaned against a low wall, hands visible, posture relaxed. If there were cameras, Santos knew they'd be too well hidden to spot. You shouldn't text from department numbers for unofficial meetings, Santos said as he approached. IA classes cover that, I think. Cole chuckled. If I cared about IA's opinion, you and I wouldn't be here. He nodded toward the church. Fitting setting, don't you think? Depends what kind of confession you're planning to make. Confession, Cole repeated. Always such a dramatic word. He looked at him, expression more tired than smug. You think I'm some cartoon villain with a red pen, doctoring records to frame random people for fun? I think you've learned how to bend old evidence until it fits the story everyone needs at that moment, Santos said. Fun or not, Cole studied him. Everyone, he echoed. That's the part you keep skipping. You talk about truth like it lives in a vacuum. But tell me, how many times have you seen families crumble under not knowing? How many mothers have looked you in the eye begging for any answer, any at all, just so they can sleep? That doesn't justify lying to them, Santos said. I'm not talking about fabricating bodies. Cole snapped, then lowered his voice again. I'm talking about choosing. Between two possible villains, both plausible, both dirty. One dead, one alive. One beloved, one peripheral. You really think the system doesn't make that kind of choice every day? Santos didn't answer. They both knew it did. What you're doing, Cole continued, is pulling the curtain in the middle of the performance. You're showing the audience the wires. You think they'll thank you? They'll tear down the stage and then complain there's no show. If the show is built on sand, maybe it shouldn't be standing, Santos said. Cole smiled sadly. You're a better writer than you think. I read your little manifesto, you know, the one you hid under your drawer. Solid work. Honest. Bleak. He nodded toward the church's dark windows. You're not so different from the priests. You want to tell a story that redeems something. I just want to keep the lights on, by editing reality. Santos said. By managing it. Cole countered. Look, Donovan. Maybe he did it. Maybe he didn't. The evidence points enough in his direction that a jury might say yes. Sister Elena still ends up dead in every version. The only variable is whether the city believes the system tried. Santos shook his head. You talk like a man who's never been on the wrong side of a story. Cole's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, something unpolished flashed in his eyes, a hint of old anger or hurt. It vanished as quickly as it came. You're not going to stop the trial, Cole said. The machine is already moving, but you have changed one thing. What's that? When I tweak a file now, someone's watching for the edit. He stepped away from the wall. Careful what you wish for, detective. You wanted eyes on the frame. You've got them. Now everyone's looking for angles, and no one's actually looking at the picture. He walked off into the dark, his figure swallowed by the edge of the lot. The church bell chimed 9 times, slow and hollow. 2 days later, an unmarked padded envelope arrived in Santos's personal mailbox at home. No return address, postmark ink slightly smeared. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a strip of negatives and a stack of glossy prints, the missing crime scene photos from 2003. He laid them out on his table carefully, hands steady, the way he used to handle film in the era before every image was pixels. Sister Elena, face obscured by the angle, the rectory door behind her, the garden as it had been before asphalt. The note, "Forgive me, Father," lying not in the Bible as the report described, but halfway between her hand and the doorway, edges damp. A partial shoe print in the dirt he didn't recognize from any diagram. A shadow at the top of the frame that might be a tree branch, might be a person. These weren't copies from the official file. These were something else. Perhaps a photographer's backup roll, perhaps prints someone had kept off the books. On the back of the last photo, in faint pencil, the same careful handwriting as before, "First draft." He sat there a long time, the hum of his refrigerator an odd echo of the evidence room fridges. If these images were real, and his gut said they were, then his sense of the case had been right. The original record had been messier than the version in the box. The note's position, the print, the shadow, all details that could have supported alternative theories, all details that had quietly vanished when the narrative tightened around Donovan. Legally, the chain of custody for these photos was broken. They were toxic in court terms, unverifiable, unlogged, vulnerable to attack. But ethically, they were dynamite. Not because they named a new killer, but because they showed how much reality could change between shutter and archive. He scanned them, saved them to multiple drives, printed a second set, and locked it in his desk at work. Then he called Mariana. "I have something," he said. "Not for tomorrow. For that box you're keeping." She came to his apartment with a canvas bag that looked harmlessly like groceries. He showed her the photos, watched the color shift in her face. "Can you use them?" he asked. "Not the way you want," she said. "Anything I publish has to be sourced, attributable, defensible. Anonymous negatives in a detective's kitchen will get torn apart. But in 10 years, when someone else files a records request and finds your affidavit, and then finds a reference to these in my private archive? Maybe." "Delayed truth," he said. "Deferred." She corrected. "Truth doesn't go away just because no one prints it." He believed that. He had to. As the trial date crept closer, the city's attention tightened around the case again. Talk radio hosts debated reasonable doubt like it was a sports score. Opinion pieces argued over whether questioning evidence handling made one an enemy of justice or its truest friend. The church issued another statement, this one shorter, simpler. "We pray that whatever is hidden will be revealed, and that those who bear witness will have courage." He read that line twice. He knew his role in the courtroom would be boxed in by procedure. He would be asked what he saw, what he wrote down, what he did. The system would slice his experience into admissible and inadmissible, relevant and extraneous. His doubts would be carefully framed, his affidavit referenced only when strategically useful to one side or the other. But outside that room, in the quiet spaces, on hidden drives, in sealed drawers, in a columnist's offline box, labeled with a word only they two knew, another record would exist. One that didn't offer a clean, solved banner. One that let the Miami 2003 cold case remain what it really was. Unresolved, uncomfortable, instructive. The headline would still live its loud public life. Cold case solved, arrest shocks church community. That version would run in documentaries and anniversary features, comfort people who needed their world to behave. In the shadows, a counter-caption had begun to form, not to replace the first, but to haunt it. Something like, "Cold case contested, evidence questions shake the story that was supposed to let everyone sleep." And somewhere between those two, Rafael Santos sat with a stack of photos and a file called Unwritten, knowing that the real battle was no longer over who had killed a nun behind a church, but over who would own the last telling of it. The trial didn't start with a bang. It started with a schedule. A date on a calendar circled in red, a notice posted on the court website, a brief mention on the evening news, jury selection in the case of State Visitor Michael Donovan to begin Monday. No sirens, no special bulletin, just an appointment with an old ghost. On the first day, the courthouse wore its usual disguise, neutral, dignified, pretending not to know what people were really carrying through its doors. Santos stood on the steps for a moment before going in, watching the small crowd gather. Parishioners clutching rosaries, law students eager for drama, reporters adjusting camera angles. A few people who came simply because the words "cold case" always pulled them in. The headline had become a magnet all over again. Miami 2003 cold case solved. Unexpected arrest rocks church community. It hovered over the building like a banner no one could see, but everyone felt. He wasn't part of the prosecuting team anymore, not officially, but his name was on the witness list in both columns. Fact witness for the state, reluctant ally for the defense. That alone told him how confused the story had become. Inside, the courtroom was brighter than it looked on television. Fluorescent light flattened faces, polished wood turned glossy under too many eyes. Donovan sat at the defense table in a suit that didn't quite fit, hands folded, eyes lowered. He looked like someone who had rehearsed contrition and then forgotten the lines. Behind him, a few members of his current congregation had flown in, people who knew him only as the soft-voiced deacon who visited hospitals and organized food drives. On the other side, a row of St. Anthony parishioners sat stiffly upright, as if good posture could signal loyalty to the memory of Sister Elena. The judge read instructions, jurors were sworn in, opening statements began. The prosecutor's voice was steady, measured, built from the same scaffolding Santos had heard in the pre-trial meetings. A life of service cut short, a trusted church worker with opportunity, and a hidden burden of guilt. A note that read, "Forgive me, Father, a DNA match, the miracle of modern science." The narrative flowed smoothly, with curated pauses for impact. It was the story the city had approved, the one the system knew how to tell. When the defense rose, the tone shifted. No fireworks, no shouting. Just a careful, almost conversational dismantling of inevitability. "This case," the defense attorney said, "comes to you not fresh from a crime scene, but from a box that has been opened and closed more times than anyone can now fully account for. You will hear about miracles of technology. You will also hear about missing photographs, unlogged access, and a detective sitting right over there who had enough concerns to file a sworn affidavit saying, essentially, I am no longer sure this story is as simple as it appears." Heads turned toward Santos without subtlety. He kept his face still. He didn't testify the first day, or the second. He watched from the back as the foundation was laid. Crime scene technicians describing what they could recall from 2 decades ago, lab analysts explaining how old samples can still be tested, parishioners recalling the shock and grief of losing Sister Elena. Memory, already fragile in the best of circumstances, bent around leading questions and courtroom formality. When his name was finally called, the air seemed to thicken. He walked to the stand, placed his hand on the Bible, took the oath, the same book that had once held the note. The symmetry did not comfort him. The prosecutor went first, keeping the questions tight. "Detective Santos, did you participate in the review of the Marquez file as part of the cold case initiative?" "Yes." "Did you request testing of the DNA sample from the confessional railing?" "Yes." "Did that testing produce a match to the defendant, Michael Donovan?" "Yes." "Did you find any evidence that this DNA result was inaccurate or falsified?" "No," he said, because that part was true. "The match is real. The question is what it means." The prosecutor hesitated, glanced at the judge, then moved past the last sentence as if it hadn't been spoken. He led Santos through the timeline, the rediscovery of the file, the lab's conclusion. Each answer, stripped to its bones, supported the state's frame. Then the defense approached. "Detective," she said, tone polite but edged. "You said, the question is what it means. What did you mean by that? The presence of DNA doesn't automatically define involvement." He answered. "It tells us contact happened. We interpret the how and why based on context." "Context like chain of custody?" she asked. "Yes." "Context like whether the item was stored properly? Whether access was fully logged? Whether the original scene was documented completely?" "Yes." "Did you observe gaps in that context in this case?" "Yes." He watched jurors lean forward a fraction, as if someone had finally turned up the volume on the channel they'd wanted to hear. He described carefully the unlogged reseal, the missing envelope, the second DNA profile with modern polymer on the note. He did not speculate aloud about Cole. He didn't need to. The implications floated between words, heavy and immediate. "Detective," the defense said, "without those irregularities, would you have filed an affidavit under seal to put your concerns on record?" "No." "So something about this case was different." "Yes." The prosecutor objected a few times, arguing about scope, about intent. The judge allowed more than he blocked. Somewhere behind Santos, he could feel the DA's frustration tightening like a rope. He kept his answers factual, even when the defense tried to tug him into opinion. "Do you believe that, at minimum, the handling of evidence in this case opens the door to reasonable doubt?" she eventually asked. He paused, that moment stretched, the kind that decides how everyone will remember a witness. "Reasonable doubt," he said slowly, "is a legal standard for you, the attorneys, and for the jury. My job is to describe what I saw. What I saw tells me this. The record in this case does not fully reflect the condition of the original evidence. That gap matters. It wasn't the dramatic declaration some might have wanted. It was worse, in a way. It was precise. When he stepped down, the courtroom felt altered, not flipped, not transformed, but shifted a few degrees off its axis. He caught Cole's eye in the back row on his way out. The forensic tech's expression was unreadable, but his jaw was set tighter than usual. If this were one of the youth tapes from 2003, Santos thought, this would be the frame where the editor cuts away. Outside, microphones met him like a wall. "Detective, are you saying you don't trust your own case? Do you believe the wrong man is on trial? Is this about departmental politics?" He gave no statement. "I can't comment on ongoing proceedings," he said, over and over, until his voice became another background sound, like traffic or air conditioning. Inside, the official story continued. Outside, a second story began to germinate in sound bites and shaky video clips. That night, he went home to find no envelope under his door, no new note in careful pencil. Just silence, almost more unsettling than contact. The column Mariana had promised came out the next day. It didn't mention names, it didn't mention churches or specific cases. It asked, instead, what happens when a city builds whole rituals around celebrating the rare "solved at last" headline, but never examines the ecosystem that produces it. It asked who benefits when closure is sold like a civic product. It asked whether we know the difference between justice fulfilled and anxiety sedated. The comments were predictably split. Some thanked her for articulating their unease. Others accused her of hating cops, or hating faith, or both. But the idea was out there now, like a tiny shard of glass on a busy sidewalk. Most people would never step on it. The ones who did wouldn't forget. Back in court, the trial marched on. The prosecution leaned hard on emotion. Sister Elena's kindness, Donovan's